The clink of crystal and the low hum of polite conversation in her parents' dining room felt like a cage. Ilara forced a smile, her hand finding Liam's under the massive oak table. His fingers, calloused and strong, squeezed back, a tiny anchor in a sea of condescending smiles. "And Liam, any luck with those job applications?" her father asked, not even bothering to mask the disdain as he swirled his burgundy wine. "I heard the factory downtown is hearing line workers. It's honest work for some." A titter of laughter skittered around the table. Her cousin, Chloe, smirked, her gaze raking over Liam's simple, worn jacket. "Oh, I'm sure he's aiming much higher than that. Perhaps assistant manager at a car wash." Ilara's cheeks burned. She saw the way they looked at him, at them the beautiful, accomplished heiress who had thrown her life away on a man who could barely, in their eyes, afford the meal he was eating. She opened her mouth to defend him, to spit fire, but Liam's gentle pressure on her hand stopped her. He just smiled, a quiet, unreadable thing that never quite reached his eyes. He endured their barbs with a stillness that they mistook for weakness. But as the mockery crescendoed, a chilling thought sliced through Ilara's humiliation. What if the quiet man beside her, the man they dismissed as a failure, was guarding a secret so colossal it could shatter their privileged world into dust? There was a time when Ilara's world was all glitter and gold, a gilded cage lined with her family's expectations. She was supposed to marry a hedge fund manager, a tech bro, someone whose wealth was as loud and polished as the marble floors in their foyer. Then she met Liam. He was fixing the engine of her broken-down car in the rain, his knuckles bloody, his focus absolute. He didn't have a trust fund. He had a tool kit and a quiet intensity that spoke to a part of her she'd long forgotten. Her family had called it a phase, a rebellion. Her mother had wept, "You're choosing a life of struggle, you'll be a laughingstock." And she was. At every family gathering, every charity gala she attended alone because Liam was working, she felt their pitying stares. She bore it all for the man who looked at her not as an asset but as the center of his universe. But as the years passed, a sliver of doubt, cold and sharp, began to form. What if the man they had all dismissed so cruelly was, in fact, the very one silently controlling their fates all along? Liam's world had never been one of quiet dinners and whispered insults. It was one of roaring stock exchanges and the deafening silence of empty warehouses he'd turned into empires. He'd built his first company from a dusty garage, selling it for a sum that would make her father's entire portfolio look like pocket change. He was a ghost in the machine of global finance, a billionaire who preferred the scent of old paper and engine grease to the sterile smell of new money. He hid his wealth not out of shame but as a shield. He'd seen how money poisoned, how it attracted sycophants and strangled genuine connection. With Ilara, he'd found something real, something untouched by the corrupting influence of his fortune. He wore his humble disguise like armor, protecting the one pure thing in his life. But why would a man of such immense, untouchable power choose to live like a shadow, enduring daily humiliations for a love that seemed, from the outside, to cost him his pride? The mockery reached its peak at the annual Founders' Gala, an event Ilara's family treated with religious reverence. Chloe, emboldened by champagne, sidled up to them in front of a gathered clique. "Ilara, darling, that dress is courageous. Last season, isn't it? I suppose some budgets only stretch so far." She turned her venomous smile to Liam. And Liam, still playing the dutiful house husband. It must be so relaxing, not having any real ambitions to weigh you down. Something in Ilara snapped. The years of quiet dignity evaporated. "You will not speak to my husband that way," she said, her voice low and trembling with a fury that silenced the group around them. "His character is worth more than all of your empty bank accounts combined." Chloe laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Character doesn't pay the bills, sweetheart, but I'm sure you're becoming an expert on that." The crowd stared, a mixture of pity and morbid fascination on their faces. Ilara felt the heat of 1,000 silent judgments. She looked at Liam, expecting to see shame, but instead she saw a profound sadness in his eyes. And then a resolve. He slowly, deliberately placed his champagne flute on a passing tray. The air crackled. The gentle mask he wore for years fell away, replaced by an authority that seemed to physically alter the space around him. And that's when he stood, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of his tormentors, ready to end the charade that had protected them for far too long. The next day, the boardroom of her father's company, Sterling Global, was a temple of cold, modern power. Her father, the CEO, was mid-presentation, his voice booming with self-importance when the massive double doors swung open. Liam walked in, but it wasn't her Liam. This man wore a custom-tailored suit that cost more than a sports car. His posture was that of a conqueror, and his eyes held a chilling, absolute authority. He didn't walk to a seat, he took command of the room itself. He moved to the head of the table where a nameplate had already been placed. Liam Thorne, Chief Executive Officer. The silence that fell was absolute, heavier than any sound. Jaws went slack. Her father's face drained of all color, the presentation remote slipping from his grasp and clattering on the polished floor. The revelation was a seismic shock, a tectonic shift in their reality. But the sight of their stunned, terrified faces was only the beginning of a much more dangerous game. Because immense power doesn't erase the sting of betrayal, it merely gives you the means to answer it. In the whirlwind that followed, Alara didn't see a stranger in the powerful CEO. She saw the same man who'd held her through storms, the man whose love had never wavered. He never needed to prove his worth to her. His battle had been a solitary one, a test to see if he could be loved for nothing but his own soul. In the fire of their public humiliation, their bond didn't just heal, it was reforged in titanium. They were no longer the society heiress and the poor mechanic. They were partners, a united front against a world that had scorned them. Their triumph was sweet, a vindication sung from the rooftops of his skyscrapers. But as they stood together at the pinnacle of their victory, a cold dread whispered a question. Would this hard-won triumph ultimately bring them closer, or would it invite a swarm of new, more ruthless enemies who couldn't stand to see their love prevail? The enemies emerged from the shadows, as they always do. Her father, humiliated and ousted, began plotting a hostile takeover with a rival corporation. Chloe, her jealousy now a toxic fuel, started a smear campaign, leaking fabricated stories to the press, painting Liam as a manipulative predator and Alara as a gullible fool. The business rivals, sensing blood in the water, circled, launching corporate raids and legal battles designed to cripple Liam's empire. The very foundation of their life was under assault, not from without, but from within the gilded circles they had once been a part of. The pressure mounted, a constant, grinding siege on their peace and their marriage. And in the quiet, fearful moments, a terrible thought would cross Alara's mind. When loyalty was tested to its absolute breaking point, whose side would her own flesh and blood truly force her to choose? The emotional climax came on the eve of the shareholder vote that would decide the fate of Liam's company. Her father, in a final, desperate act of vengeance, confronted them in Liam's penthouse office, a file of forged documents in his hand. "You think you've won," he spat at Liam. "You're a fraud who stole my daughter and my company. I'll see you in prison." He then turned to Alara, his eyes pleading and vicious. "He's lied to you for years, Alara. Everything he is a lie. Come back to your family. Renounce him, and I'll make this all go away." Liam stood, not as the fearsome CEO, but simply as a man, his heart in his eyes, waiting for her verdict. This was the final test. It wasn't about stock prices or board seats. It was about the promise they'd made in a dusty garage, long before anyone knew the name Liam Thorne. Alara looked from her father's twisted face to her husband's vulnerable one. In that suspended moment, she realized the marriage that had been mocked by so many, the union they called a pathetic joke, was in fact the one unshakable, powerful thing that could save them both from the abyss of bitterness and greed. She stepped forward, not toward her father, but to stand beside Liam, lacing her fingers with his. "My family is right here," she said, her voice clear and steady. "You are dismissed." The defeat on her father's face was more complete than any financial ruin. The subsequent shareholder vote was a landslide victory. Liam's corporate enemies were routed, the smear campaign collapsed under the weight of its own lies, and the truth of his integrity and their love shone brighter than any scandal. In the end, their love and their shared dignity stood taller than all the skyscrapers he owned. The family that had once mocked them was left humbled and broken, forced to watch from the sidelines as the couple they'd scorned built a legacy not just of wealth, but of unwavering devotion. So I ask you, the one listening to this tale of love and triumph, if you were in Alara's shoes, feeling the sting of every insult, bearing the weight of that betrayal, could you find the strength to forgive the ones who mocked your love, the ones who were meant to support you? Or would you, like she ultimately had to, leave them behind forever to protect the sacred thing you'd built? Their story is a reminder that true worth is never found in a bank statement, but in the courage to stand by your choices. What would you have done when the world laughed at your love? Would you have doubted, or would you have held on, trusting that the heart sees what the eyes cannot? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that make you feel, that make you think, and that remind you of the power that lies in staying true to yourself. The silence in the penthouse after her father slunk away was heavier than any boardroom showdown. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the war, the air thick with the ghosts of shattered relationships and the palpable weight of the future. Liam's shoulders, usually a bastion of unyielding strength, slumped slightly as he turned to her. The CEO mask was gone completely. In its place was just a man, raw and laid bare before the woman who held his entire world in her hands. "He was right about one thing," Liam said, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "I did lie to you, by omission, every day for 3 years." Alara reached out, her fingers gently tracing the line of his jaw. "You gave me the truth of you," she whispered. "Your kindness, your integrity, the way you make me feel seen, not as an heiress but as a woman. That was never a lie. The rest was just noise." But the noise, as it turned out, had a relentless echo. The victory was theirs, but the cost was a landscape of scorched earth. Her family, those who weren't actively plotting against them, had become a void. Birthday invitations ceased. Her phone, once buzzing with a constant stream of trivial family gossip, fell into a permanent, accusing silence. It was a different kind of humiliation, a chilling isolation that the warmth of Liam's love couldn't always completely thaw. She had chosen him unequivocally, but in doing so, she had excommunicated herself from the only world she'd ever known. The question now wasn't about winning. It was about how to build a life in the ruins. Liam saw her quiet pain, the way she'd sometimes stare at a childhood photo with a wistful sadness. His vengeance had been swift and absolute in the corporate realm, but he was powerless against this quieter, more intimate ache. So he began a new, secret project. He started not with blueprints or business plans, but with memories. He tracked down her old nanny, the one who'd been fired for showing Alara too much affection. He found her first art teacher, the one who'd told her she had a gift before her parents insisted she focus on more practical pursuits. He reached out to the few cousins who had shown her kindness, the ones who had been silenced by the family's dominant, cruel voices. Meanwhile, the business attacks grew more insidious. Her father, partnering with a ruthless rival named Silas Vancorp, launched a proxy war, using every dirty trick in the book. They targeted Liam's philanthropic ventures, spreading rumors they were money-laundering fronts. They poached key executives with obscene bonuses, trying to cripple his operations from within. The pressure was a constant, grinding siege. One evening, after a particularly brutal day where Vancorp had nearly succeeded in sabotaging a major merger, Liam came home to find Alara not weeping, but standing before a canvas in their sunroom, painting with a ferocity he hadn't seen in years. She was reclaiming a piece of herself the world had tried to take. The final confrontation didn't happen in a boardroom. It happened at the grand opening of the Thornalara Foundation, a sprawling community arts center he had built in her honor, a place dedicated to nurturing the kind of creativity her family had stifled. As Alara stood at the podium, speaking with a passion and grace that captivated the entire city, her father and Silas Vancorp watched from the back of the crowd, their faces etched with bitter defeat. They had tried to break him with money and power, and they had failed. They had tried to break her with isolation and scorn, and in response, she had only built something more beautiful. After her speech, as the crowd applauded, her father approached. The anger was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shame. You built all this," he stammered, not to Liam but to her. Alara looked at him, her gaze steady, no longer seeking his approval but offering him a glimpse of the woman she had become. "We did," she said, her hand finding Liam. "We built it on a foundation you could never understand, love." He left without another word, a broken man finally comprehending the magnitude of what he had lost. As he disappeared into the night, Liam pulled Alara close, his lips brushing her temple. "It's over," he murmured. "Truly over." They stood there under the stars, the lights of the arts center glowing behind them, a beacon not of wealth, but of a love that had been tested in fire and had emerged not just unbroken, but unbreakable. The world had mocked them, betrayed them, and thrown its worst at them. And in the end, all it had done was prove that the greatest fortune wasn't measured in billions, but in the quiet, unwavering certainty of the hand you're holding in the dark. So I leave you with this final thought, as you go about your own life, facing your own challenges and judgments. What is the one thing you would fight for, the one love or belief you would protect, even if the whole world stood against you? And more importantly, do you have the courage, like Alara and Liam, to build your own beautiful masterpiece from the ashes others leave behind? If this story moved you, reminded you of your own strength, or made you believe in the power of resilience, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to follow us for more journeys into the heart of what truly matters. Of course, here is the continued and expanded story, weaving in new layers of conflict, character development, and emotional depth to build towards a 20,000-word narrative, all while maintaining the requested cinematic and gripping tone. The silence in the penthouse after her father slunk away was heavier than any boardroom showdown. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the war, the air thick with the ghosts of shattered relationships and the palpable weight of the future. Liam's shoulders, usually a bastion of unyielding strength, slumped slightly as he turned to her. The CEO mask was gone completely. In its place was just a man, raw and laid bare before the woman who held his entire world in his hands. "He was right about one thing," Liam said, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "I did lie to you, by omission, every day for 3 years." Alara reached out, her fingers gently tracing the line of his jaw. "You gave me the truth of you," she whispered. "Your kindness, your integrity, the way you make me feel seen, not as an heiress but as a woman. That was never a lie. The rest was just noise." But the noise, as it turned out, had a relentless echo. The victory was theirs, but the cost was a landscape of scorched earth. Her family, those who weren't actively plotting against them, had become a void. Birthday invitations ceased. Her phone, once buzzing with a constant stream of trivial family gossip, fell into a permanent, accusing silence. It was a different kind of humiliation. A chilling isolation that the warmth of Liam's love couldn't always completely thaw. She had chosen him, unequivocally, but in doing so, she had excommunicated herself from the only world she'd ever known. The question now wasn't about winning. It was about how to build a life in the ruins. Could a love that had triumphed over public scorn survive the slow, creeping frost of private loneliness? Liam saw her quiet pain, the way she'd sometimes stare at a childhood photo with a wistful sadness. His vengeance had been swift and absolute in the corporate realm, but he was powerless against this quieter, more intimate ache. So he began a new, secret project. He started not with blueprints or business plans, but with memories. He tracked down her old nanny, Agatha, the one who'd been fired for showing Alara too much affection. He found her first art teacher, Mr. Albright, the one who'd told her she had a gift before her parents insisted she focus on more practical pursuits. He reached out to the few cousins who had shown her kindness, the ones who had been silenced by the family's dominant, cruel voices. He was, piece by piece, trying to rebuild her world with the people who valued her soul, not her surname. Meanwhile, the business attacks grew more insidious. Her father, Arthur Sterling, partnering with a ruthless rival named Silas Vancorp, launched a proxy war, using every dirty trick in the book. They targeted Liam's philanthropic ventures, spreading rumors they were money-laundering fronts. They poached key executives with obscene bonuses, trying to cripple his operations from within. The pressure was a constant, grinding siege. One evening, after a particularly brutal day where Vancorp had nearly succeeded in sabotaging a major merger, Liam came home to find Alara not weeping, but standing before a canvas in their sunroom, painting with a ferocity he hadn't seen in years. Splashes of defiant crimson and hopeful gold met on the canvas, a storm of emotion that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. She was reclaiming a piece of herself the world had tried to take. But as she painted, a part of her wondered, was she building a new life or just hiding from the old one in a gilded cage of Liam's making? The final confrontation didn't happen in a boardroom. It happened at the grand opening of the Thornalara Foundation, a sprawling community arts center he had built in her honor, a place dedicated to nurturing the kind of creativity her family had stifled. The media was there in droves, captivated by the Cinderella story with a twist. The princess had chosen the pauper, only to discover he was the true king. As Alara stood at the podium, speaking with a passion and grace that captivated the entire city, her father and Silas Vancorp watched from the back of the crowd, their faces etched with bitter defeat. They had tried to break him with money and power, and they had failed. They had tried to break her with isolation and scorn, and in response, she had only built something more beautiful. After her speech, as the crowd applauded, her father approached. The anger was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shame. You built all this," he stammered, not to Liam but to her. Alara looked at him, her gaze steady, no longer seeking his approval but offering him a glimpse of the woman she had become. "We did," she said, her hand finding Liam. "We built it on a foundation you could never understand, love." He left without another word, a broken man finally comprehending the magnitude of what he had lost. As he disappeared into the night, Liam pulled Alara close, his lips brushing her temple. "It's over," he murmured. "Truly over." Or so they thought. For Silas Vancorp, the public humiliation at the gala was not an end but a beginning. He wasn't a man who felt shame, he felt insulted, and his vengeance would be far colder, far more personal than any corporate raid. He began to dig, not into Liam's businesses, which were fortress strong, but into his past, the past Liam had so carefully sealed away. Vancorp's investigators scoured the globe, looking for any crack, any shadow in the pristine image of Liam Thorne. What dirty secret from his rise to power could be leveraged? What forgotten face from the old days could be bribed or threatened to come forward and shatter the fairy tale? The real war for their souls was only just beginning. Weeks turned into a fragile, beautiful peace. Alara, inspired by the foundation, began to teach a weekly art class for underprivileged children. It was there, surrounded by the unfiltered joy and messy creativity, that she found a sense of purpose that dwarfed any she'd known on charity boards. Liam would sometimes watch her from the doorway, his heart swelling at the sight of her, covered in paint, laughing freely. This was the woman he had fallen in love with, finally unleashed. He continued his secret mission, and one rainy afternoon, he brought a surprise visitor to the penthouse. Alara opened the door to find Agatha, her nanny, now 20 years older, her kind eyes filled with tears. "My little Ella," she whispered, and Alara fell into her arms, sobbing with the relief of a child coming home. It was the first stitch in the torn fabric of her heart. Liam had given her back a piece of her history, purified of its poison. But for every moment of light, a shadow lengthened. Vancorp found his crack. It was a man named Mickey, Liam's former partner from his very first desperate venture, a tech startup that had imploded amidst accusations of stolen intellectual property. Mickey, who had been left with nothing while Liam had somehow mysteriously recovered to build his empire. Mickey, bitter and drowning in debt, was the perfect pawn. The attack came on a Tuesday, a sprawling, meticulously researched feature in a global financial magazine, alleging that Liam Thorne's foundation was built on a lie. It presented Mickey's eyewitness account, painting a picture of a young, ruthless Liam who had betrayed his closest friend, stealing his code and his future to fund his own rise. The article was damning, filled with half-truths and twisted narratives that were impossible to immediately disprove. It questioned the source of his initial capital, insinuating it was ill-gotten. The media, ever hungry for a fall from grace, pounced. The narrative shifted overnight from billionaire CEO's secret identity to, was the Cinderella story a con? The board of Thorne Industries grew nervous. Stock prices dipped. The vultures were circling again, but this time they were attacking his character, the very thing Alara had always defended. Liam was calm, methodical, assembling his legal team, preparing a counteroffensive. But Alara saw the flicker of something ancient in his eyes, not guilt, but a profound, weary pain. This was an old wound, when he thought it healed, now ripped open and displayed for the world to see. "Liam," she said that night, finding him staring out at the city lights, his posture rigid. "Talk to me. What really happened with Mickey?" He was silent for a long time, the weight of his past pressing down on him. "It wasn't like he says," he finally said, his voice low. "He was my friend, but he was reckless. He was going to sell our prototype, our future asterisk, to a patent troll for a quick, desperate payout. He would have buried us both. I had to stop him. I used my own savings, everything I had, to buy him out, to save the company. He saw it as a betrayal. He took the money and vanished. I thought I was saving us both." Alara listened, her heart aching for the young, torn man he had been. "Then we fight," she said simply, coming to stand beside him. "We tell your story." But it wasn't that easy. Mickey, coached by Vancorp's lawyers, was a compelling, broken figure on television. He spoke of friendship and betrayal with a raw pain that resonated. The court of public opinion was turning. Donors began pulling their support from the foundation. The children at Alara's class asked her, with heartbreaking innocence, if Mr. Liam was a bad man. The isolation she had felt from her family was now being mirrored by the world at large. The triumph they had fought so hard for was crumbling, and the foundation of their new life felt like it was built on sand. Could a love that had withstood mockery survive the corrosive poison of widespread doubt? Liam, determined to protect her, began to withdraw. He buried himself in work, in legal strategies, building walls around himself just as he had in the early days of their marriage. He stopped talking about the case, his answers to her questions becoming clipped, distant. He was trying to shield her from the storm, but to Alara, it felt like he was shutting her out. The unity they had found was fracturing under the pressure. She was his partner, but he was treating her like a porcelain doll he needed to protect from his ugly past. The breaking point came during a live, televised interview. A notoriously aggressive anchor ambushed Liam with new evidence, doctored emails that seemed to corroborate Mickey's story. Watching from home, Alara saw the flicker of shock and fury in Liam's eyes before his professional mask slammed back into place. But she also saw the narrative being cemented in real time. He was being tried and convicted on national television. She couldn't stand it. She couldn't sit in their silent, tense penthouse while the man she loved was being torn apart. Grabbing her coat, she headed for the studio. She didn't have a plan. She only had a burning, undeniable need to stand beside him, to show the world that she, the one person who knew him best, had no doubts. She arrived as the interview was reaching its tense conclusion. The anchor, smelling blood, leaned in. "Mr. Thorne, how does your wife feel about all this? Is she standing by her man, or is she beginning to see the man behind the curtain?" Liam's jaw tightened. This was the question he had dreaded. Before he could form a diplomatic answer, the studio doors swung open, Every camera swiveled. There she was, Alara, her hair slightly windswept, her eyes blazing with a fire that could power the city. She walked onto the set, ignoring the stunned producer's protests, and took the empty seat beside Liam. She took his hand, lacing her fingers firmly with his, and faced the camera. "You want to know how I feel," she said, her voice clear and resonant, cutting through the studio's tension. "I feel proud. I'm married to a man of immense integrity who is being slandered by a man who sold his own future for a quick profit and is now being paid to sell his past. The story you are being told is a fiction, designed by jealous, small men who cannot stand our happiness or our success." She turned to look directly at Liam, her gaze softening. "My husband saved his company. He saved our future, and he would do it again. I know his heart. I have seen his soul, and I am not standing by my man. I am standing with him." The silence in the studio was absolute. The anchor was speechless. In that moment, Alara wasn't a society wife or a victim. She was a queen defending her king. The clip went viral instantly. "Standing with him" trended worldwide. The public, moved by her raw, unscripted loyalty, began to turn. The tide of opinion shifted on the power of her faith alone. In the car ride home, Liam was quiet. He held her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. When they finally stepped into their penthouse, he turned to her, his eyes glistening. "You were magnificent," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "But you shouldn't have had to do that. I was trying to protect you." "I don't need your protection, Liam," she said, cupping his face. "I need your partnership. Your past is my past. Your battles are my battles. Don't you see? We are one. Always." It was the final, crucial lesson they both needed to learn. The walls between them came down, not with a crash but with a gentle, final sigh. They were truly, completely united. With their relationship stronger than ever, they turned their combined focus to the fight. Alara, using her deep understanding of social nuance and media, began to craft their counter-narrative. She found old friends from Liam's coding days who came forward with the real story. She helped their legal team unearth financial records that proved Mickey had been paid a more than fair price for his shares, and that the stolen code allegations were baseless. They discovered that Vancorp had been bankrolling Mickey's gambling debts, a direct link to the conspiracy. The final showdown was a legal masterstroke. In a packed courtroom, Liam's lawyers presented their evidence, systematically dismantling Mickey's testimony and exposing Vancorp's orchestration of the entire smear campaign. When the verdict came in, vindicating Liam on all counts, it was more than a legal victory. It was a total annihilation of their enemies. Vancorp's company faced massive sanctions and a ruined reputation. Mickey, his usefulness gone, was left with nothing. Arthur Sterling, seeing the complete and utter destruction of his last, desperate ally, finally sent a letter to Alara. It was not an apology but a surrender. A single sentence: "You were always stronger than I knew." The victory this time was different. It was quieter, deeper. It wasn't about shock and awe, it was about truth and resilience. They had faced the worst the world could throw at them: mockery, betrayal, slander, and doubt, and they had emerged not just intact but indivisible. Years later, the Thorn Alara Foundation had become a global force for good. Alara was its visionary director, her name now synonymous not with her family's wealth, but with her own powerful legacy of empowerment through art. Liam, having secured his empire, spent more time mentoring young entrepreneurs, teaching them that success without integrity was the greatest poverty of all. They were giving a joint lecture at their alma mater, a place that had once known Alara as the sterling heiress and Liam as a scholarship student nobody noticed. Now, they stood on stage as equals, as partners, as legends. A young student raised her hand. "What's the secret?" she asked. "To all of this, to building something that lasts?" Liam and Alara looked at each other, a whole conversation passing between them in a single glance. He smiled and gestured for her to answer. Alara leaned toward the microphone, her voice soft but carrying to every corner of the hall. "The secret," she said, is to find someone who sees the masterpiece you were meant to be, even when you're covered in the dust of your own struggles. And then, she added, her gaze sweeping over the captivated audience, have the courage to stand with them through the laughter and the tears and build your own beautiful, unshakable truth together. As the applause washed over them, Liam took her hand, lifting it to his lips. The journey had been longer and more painful than either could have imagined. But as they stood there, bathed in the adoration they had earned and the love they had forged, every scar, every moment of doubt, every tear shed in a lonely penthouse or a mocking dining room felt worth it. They had not just found each other. They had built a universe for two, a sanctuary that no storm, external or internal, could ever breach again. And so their story ends not with a period, but with an ellipsis, a promise of a future forever unfolding, a love story that would continue to be told long after the lights had dimmed. Because the greatest stories aren't about the dramatic reveals or the public victories. They are about the quiet, daily choice to love, to trust, and to stand together no matter what. So I ask you one last time, as you close this chapter and return to your own life, what masterpiece are you and your loved one building together? And what are you willing to overcome to protect it? If this story has reminded you of the power of resilience and the beauty of choosing love, then share it. Let it be a beacon for others. And don't forget to follow for more journeys into the heart of what makes us human, what breaks us, and what ultimately makes us whole. The applause was a physical thing, a wave of sound that seemed to vibrate through the very stage of the university auditorium. Alara let it wash over her, a balm on old, unseen scars. Liam's hand was warm and sure in hers, his thumb tracing a gentle, rhythmic pattern on her skin, a silent Morse code of love and solidarity that had carried them through hell and back. As the clapping finally began to subside, the dean stepped forward to thank them, but a movement in the back of the hall caught Alara's eye. A woman, elegant and severe, with a shock of white hair despite her relatively young face, was standing perfectly still. She wasn't clapping. Her arms were crossed, her expression one of cool, clinical assessment, and she was staring directly at Liam with an intensity that felt like a challenge. As their eyes met for a split second, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the woman's lips before she turned and melted into the departing crowd. A cold finger of dread traced a path down Alara's spine. The war was supposed to be over, so why did it feel like a new, more dangerous front had just been opened? The feeling lingered, a ghost at the feast of their triumph. That night, in the quiet luxury of their hotel suite, the city sprawled like a bed of diamonds below them. Alara stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, the image of the white-haired woman seared into her mind. "Did you see her?" she asked, her voice quiet against the hum of the air conditioning. Liam came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "See who, my love?" "A woman at the back. She was staring at you. It felt personal." He was silent for a moment, his body tensing almost imperceptibly. "Probably a journalist or a rival. We have a lot of both," he said, his tone carefully neutral. But Alara knew every cadence of his voice, every shift in his energy. He was downplaying it. He had seen her too, and the sight had disturbed him. The peace they had fought for was a fragile illusion, and a single, silent observer had just reminded them that for people like them, there was no such thing as a final victory. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of returned normalcy, but the shadow of the woman whom Alara had privately dubbed the White Widow loomed. Liam became more preoccupied, spending longer hours in his home office, the door closed. He was quieter, more distant, the old habit of retreating into himself resurfacing. This time, however, Alara did not wait in the wings, nursing her worry. She had promised him partnership. She had promised to stand asterisk with asterisk him. She began her own quiet investigation. Using the skills she'd honed navigating high society and the media, she discreetly asked questions. She described the woman to a few trusted contacts in the corporate intelligence world Liam employed. The answers, when they came, were unsettlingly vague. "A ghost," one source said. "Her name is Dr. Isadora Vance, a strategist, a fixer. She doesn't get her hands dirty, she just orchestrates collapses. Isadora Vance. The name meant nothing to her, but it clearly meant something to Liam. When she finally confronted him, placing a printout of a grainy, years-old photo from a tech summit on his desk, he finally broke his silence. He sank into his chair, the fight going out of him. Isadora, he breathed, the word sounding like a curse. I haven't heard that name in a long time. Who is she, Liam? Elara asked, her voice gentle but firm. No more shadows, not between us. He looked up, his eyes haunted by a memory she hadn't yet unearthed. Before Mickey, before any of it, there was Isadora. He told her a story she'd never heard, of his very first raw idea, a revolutionary data algorithm. He'd been a penniless student, and Isadora, a brilliant, ambitious PhD, had taken him under her wing. She had connections, she had vision. For a few dizzying months they had been a team. I thought she believed in me, Liam said, his voice flat. But she didn't believe in *me*. She believed in the idea. She wanted to patent it, lock it away, and sell it to the highest military bidder. I wanted to build it, to make it accessible. She said I was a sentimental fool. She tried to cut me out, to claim the work as her own. The legal battle was brutal. I barely escaped with the rights. She vanished after that, but she swore she'd never forget. She said true ideas, like true power, always find their way home. The hook was set, deeper and more venomous than any before. Isadora Vance wasn't a spurned business rival. She was a scorned creator, a woman who believed a part of Liam's empire was rightfully hers. And she hadn't been watching his fall with Mickey and Vancorp with disappointment. She'd been watching it with a critic's eye, learning from their mistakes. She wouldn't attack his company or his character. She would attack the very source of his power, his foundational first innovation. The first sign of the new assault was subtle. A key researcher on Liam's most advanced AI project, a project directly descended from that original algorithm, suddenly resigned. Then another. They gave no reasons, their exit interviews bland and unhelpful. Then a small, cutting-edge tech firm named Ethogard Solutions emerged from stealth mode, announcing a product that was eerily, impossibly similar to Liam's flagship project, but with a more aggressive, militaristic edge. The CEO was a bland-faced figurehead, but the name listed as Chief Visionary Architect was Dr. Isadora Vance. She wasn't just trying to compete, she was trying to resurrect her original, twisted vision for his life's work. And she was doing it by systematically poaching his most talented people, not with money, but with something far more seductive to certain minds: the promise of unrestricted, ethically unbound innovation. Liam was faced with an impossible choice. To beat her, he would have to accelerate his own project, pushing his team into a brutal, soul-crushing race. It meant becoming the very kind of ruthless, profit-driven machine he had always despised. Or he could hold to his principles, risk losing his technological edge, and watch as Isadora's version, a version he considered dangerous, spread across the globe. It was a battle for his soul, orchestrated by the woman who had once tried to claim it. Elara watched him wrestle with the dilemma, the light in his eyes dimming under the weight of it. She saw the old Liam, the fighter, wanting to crush the threat, and the man he had become, the principled leader, warring within him. She knew he couldn't make this choice alone. This wasn't just a business decision. It was a moral crossroads that would define their legacy. One evening, she walked into his office. The blueprints and code-laden screens were lit up like a war room. "There's a third way," she said, her voice cutting through his grim concentration. He looked up, exhausted. "What way?" "Surrender." "No," she said, a fierce light in her own eyes. "We expose her, not for stealing your idea, but for her intent. You said it yourself years ago, she wanted to sell it to the highest military bidder. We take this public. We show the world what Ethogard Solutions truly stands for. We make it so toxic that no one, not even the most amoral government, will want to touch it. We fight her not in the lab, but in the court of public opinion. It's the one battlefield she won't expect, and the one where we hold all the cards." It was a gamble of epic proportions. It would mean declassifying old, painful history, potentially opening himself up to new legal challenges. It was messy, personal, and utterly brilliant. It was a strategy built not on power, but on truth. A slow smile spread across Liam's face, the first genuine one she'd seen in weeks. It was the smile of a man who remembered he didn't have to fight alone, and that his wife's courage was the most powerful weapon in his arsenal. The stage was set for the final, definitive conflict. Not a boardroom coup, not a legal battle over patents, but a war for the future itself. Liam and Alara were no longer just defending their love or their company. They were standing as a shield between Isadora's cynical, weaponized future and the hopeful, human-centric world they believed in. And as they prepared to step into the light and unleash the truth, they both knew one thing for certain. This time, there would be no shadows left to hide in for anyone. The world was about to watch a battle of ideologies, and the outcome would ripple through generations to come. The question was, would the world choose the sharp, seductive blade of power or the stronger, more enduring shield of principle? The decision to go public was a tactical nuclear option, and the fallout would be immediate and irreversible. Liam's legal team, a group of sharp-minded individuals who usually dealt in billion-dollar mergers, was aghast. You can't just say asterisk these things, his lead counsel, a man named Arthur Finch, sputtered, his face pale. These are unsubstantiated allegations from a decades-old personal dispute. The defamation suits alone would. They're not allegations, Liam interrupted, his voice calm but with a core of steel that brooked no argument. He slid a worn leather journal across the polished conference table. It was a relic from his student days, filled with his frantic, idealistic scrawls and tucked into the back, photocopied meeting notes. They're a matter of record. Her notes, my notes, see for yourself. Monetization through DoD channels. Ethical constraints are a design flaw. She wrote it herself. Alara, sitting beside him, watched the lawyers' faces change as they paged through the journal. The shock of the old-fashioned handwriting, the cold, utilitarian language set against Liam's passionate blueprints, was a powerful thing. This wasn't just business. It was a crime against an idea. This changes the calculus, Finch admitted slowly, adjusting his glasses. But it's still a massive risk. We're talking about dragging one of the most powerful, shadowy figures in tech into the light. She will not take it lying down. That's the point, Alara said, her voice clear and steady in the tense room. She's been operating in the dark for too long. She expects a corporate war, fought with patents and poached employees. She doesn't expect a spotlight. The plan, dubbed Operation Sunlight by a grimly amused Liam, was set into motion. It was a multi-pronged assault on the narrative. While Liam's engineers worked frantically to add new, public-facing features to their project, features that emphasized transparency and user control, a direct contrast to Ethelgard's closed, black box system, Alara took the lead on the public front. She reached out to a respected, fiercely independent tech journalist named Anya Sharma, a woman known for her deep dives and ethical rigor. It was a calculated risk. Anya was no friend to corporate giants, but she was a staunch defender of technological ethics. Alara didn't offer an exclusive. She offered a story, with full, uncensored access to Liam, the journal, and their entire history with Isadora. The meeting took place in a quiet corner of a public library, far from the corporate espionage that might infest their usual haunts. Anya listened, her expression unreadable, as Liam laid out the whole sordid tale: the early partnership, the ideological rift, Isadora's threats, and now, her re-emergence with a weaponized version of his life's work. "Dr. Vance is a ghost," Anya said finally, tapping her pen on her notebook. "Proving her influence is one thing, proving her intent as you describe it is another." Alara then handed her a single sheet of paper. It was a list of names, the researchers who had recently defected to Ethelgard. Next to each name was their specific area of expertise: loyalty algorithm optimization, behavioral predictive modeling for hostile entities, data obfuscation in covert ops. Anya's eyebrows rose. "This is suggestive." "It's a blueprint," Alara said quietly. "She's not building a commercial product. She's building a tool for control, and we have the original blueprint to prove it. The article dropped a week later. It wasn't on the business page. It was the cover story of the Sunday magazine under the stark, devastating headline, "The Ghost in the Machine, the Billionaire's Secret War for the Soul of AI." Anya's piece was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. It wove together the personal and the political, painting Liam not as a ruthless titan, but as a reluctant warrior, an idealist forced to fight for the heart of his creation. It contrasted his journal's hopeful scribbles, democratize access, ethics as a core architecture, with the cold, clinical language from Isidora's copied notes. It detailed the poached researchers and their disturbing specializations. And it positioned Alara not as a bystander, but as the strategic linchpin, the moral compass who had steered her husband away from a silent, shadow war and into the cleansing light of public scrutiny. The effect was seismic. The story was picked up by every major news outlet across the globe. "Whose AI is it?" began trending. Ethicists, politicians, and tech commentators weighed in, almost universally condemning Ethogard's implied purpose. The public, still wary from previous tech scandals, reacted with outrage. Protests sprung up outside Ethogard's anonymous office building. Several of the defected researchers, facing a torrent of online shame and professional censure, quietly resigned. Isadora Vance had been outmaneuvered. Her strength was in secrecy, in pulling strings from the darkness. The blinding, unforgiving glare of the public eye was her kryptonite. The first counterpunch came not from Isadora directly, but from her legal team, a predictable, massive defamation lawsuit. But it felt hollow, a desperate move from a player who had already lost the board. The media covered the lawsuit not as a serious legal threat, but as the thrashing of a wounded animal. It was then that the second, more personal attack came. Alara was at the foundation, reviewing designs for a new community mural when her assistant handed her a phone, her face worried. "It's your mother," she whispered. Alara's heart clenched. Communication with her parents had been limited to terse, formal emails about trust funds and legalities since the courtroom surrender. To get a call now. Alara, her mother's voice was strained, laced with a fear Alara hadn't heard since she was a child. "You need to stop this. You need to make him stop." "Stop what, mother?" This public spectacle with that Vance woman," her mother said, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. She contacted your father. She didn't make threats. She just laid out facts about the company, about debts we thought were hidden, about things your father did to keep Sterling Global afloat before Liam, before everything. She said if the unpleasantness continues, she would have no choice but to make certain financial records public. It wouldn't just ruin us, Alara. It would send your father to prison. The world tilted. Isadora wasn't just a ghost in the machine. She was a ghost in their family's closet, and she had just rattled the skeletons. She had found the one point of leverage they hadn't anticipated, the remnants of Alara's fractured family. She was forcing Alara to choose, once and for all, between the family she was born into and the family she had chosen to build. Alara felt the old pull of loyalty, a frayed and damaged thread, but a thread nonetheless. She thought of her father, proud and broken, facing not just financial ruin but incarceration. She thought of the shame it would bring on her mother, who, for all her faults, was a product of her gilded cage. That evening she told Liam everything. She watched the storm gather in his eyes, not at her but at the sheer, breathtaking audacity of Isadora's move. "She's trying to split us," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "She's using your past to break our present." "I know," Alara whispered, tears of frustration and anger welling in her eyes. "But Liam, he's still my father. I can't be the reason he goes to jail." Liam pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "Listen to me," he said, his voice firm against her hair. "This is what she wants. She wants you to come to me, begging me to stop. She wants to prove that my love for you is a weakness she can exploit, that principles can be sacrificed for personal sentiment." He held her at arm's length, his gaze intense. But she's wrong. Our love isn't a weakness, it's our strength. And it doesn't mean abandoning your family. It means forcing a better outcome for everyone. A new, more dangerous plan began to form, born from the crucible of this personal blackmail. They couldn't back down, but they couldn't let her parents be collateral damage either. They had to beat Isadora at her own game, in the shadows she called home. Liam activated a part of his network that even Alara knew little about, a group of digital forensic specialists and white-hat hackers who usually worked on securing government infrastructure. Their mission was not to attack, but to defend and uncover. They were to find the evidence Isadora was holding over Arthur Sterling's head, and in doing so, find a way to neutralize the threat. For Alara, it was a torturous wait. The public battle was won, but this private, silent war was agony. She met with her mother, not in their old family home, but in a neutral, quiet cafe. Her mother looked older, the carefully maintained facade finally cracked. "She'll destroy us, Alara," her mother pleaded, her hands trembling around her teacup. "Not if we destroy her first," Alara said, the words feeling foreign and powerful on her tongue. "Mother, for once you have to trust me. You have to be quiet and you have to be brave. Help us. Tell me everything you know about this. Any contact she made, any hint of what she has." It was a fragile, unprecedented alliance. From her mother's fragmented, fearful recollections, a picture emerged. Isadora hadn't just found old financial records, she had a source. Someone inside the old Sterling Global Accounting Department. A name, Gerald Porter, a man her father had fired years ago in a cost-cutting measure. Liam's team found Gerald living in modest retirement in Florida. He was, as they predicted, bitter and easily flipped. When presented with evidence of his own minor but prosecutable financial misdeeds from his Sterling days, and the promise of a significant, anonymous consulting fee from Liam, he gave them everything. He had sold the damaging files to a third-party intermediary, who they quickly traced back to a shell corporation owned by Isadora Vance. They had their proof. The blackmail was real, but now they had the evidence chain. More importantly, they had something else: leverage. They now possessed irrefutable proof that Isadora had committed felony blackmail. Liam didn't go to the police. He went directly to Isadora. The meeting was arranged in a sterile, soundproofed conference room in a law firm neither of them used. Isadora arrived alone, dressed in a sharp, blood-red suit, her white hair a stunning corona. She looked exactly as Alara remembered, composed, intelligent, and utterly cold. "Liam," she said, her voice a smooth, cultured contralto, "I see you've chosen to escalate." "I see you've chosen to target my family," Liam replied, his tone equally cool. He slid a tablet across the table. On it was a digital copy of the evidence chain, culminating in her ownership of the Shell Corporation and the records of the payment to Gerald Porter. "This is a copy. The originals are with my lawyers, along with instructions to release them to the FBI and the press if anything unfortunate should happen to me, my wife, or her family." Isadora's composure didn't crack, but a faint tightening around her eyes betrayed her. She had been outmaneuvered in her own domain. She had underestimated the lengths to which Liam would go, not for his company, but for his wife's peace of mind. "You always were sentimental," she said, a flicker of genuine contempt in her eyes. "It's a flaw I could never engineer out of you." "It's the one flaw that makes what I build worth having," Liam countered. "The deal is this: you walk away, you dissolve Ethelgard, you never come near me, my company, or anyone connected to us ever again. In return, this evidence disappears. You get to fade back into the shadows you love so much." There was a long, silent standoff. The air in the room was so thick with tension it was hard to breathe. Alara, watching from a monitor in another room, felt her nails digging into her palms. Finally, Isadora gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "It seems your wife is a better strategist than I gave her credit for," she said, her gaze flicking towards the hidden camera as if she could sense Alara's presence. A tactical retreat is sometimes the most logical move. She stood, straightening her jacket. This round is yours, Liam Thorne, but the war of ideas is never over. And with that, she turned and walked out of the room, and out of their lives, a phantom defeated not by a bigger weapon, but by a stronger shield. The relief that washed over Alara was so profound it felt like a physical transformation. The last, lingering chain to her old life, the fear for her parents, had been shattered. When she called her mother to tell her it was over, the silence on the other end of the line was followed by a soft, broken sob of gratitude. The dynamic had shifted forever. The power was no longer with the Sterlings. It was with the daughter they had once mocked. That night, standing again on their penthouse terrace, the city lights seemed brighter, the air cleaner. The battles were finally, truly over. The mockery, the corporate sabotage, the slander, the blackmail, they had weathered every storm. Liam stood behind her, his arms around her, his chin resting on her head. "There's nothing left to fight," he murmured. Alara leaned back into his strength, a deep, unshakable peace settling in her soul. "No," she agreed, looking out at the endless, glittering horizon. "There's only everything left to build." And as they stood there, two souls forged into an unbreakable alloy by fire and pressure, the world ahead of them wasn't a battlefield. It was a blank canvas, waiting for the next beautiful, collaborative masterpiece they would paint together. The story of the poor man and the society heiress was forever closed. In its place was the legend of Liam and Alara Thorne, a partnership that proved that the most powerful force in the universe, in business and in life, wasn't money or power, but the unwavering, strategic, and fiercely protected choice to love.